The streets of New Orleans were alive with the chaos only a New Year's Eve celebration could summon. Music spilled out of bars, the smell of fried food and cigarettes mingled with the river breeze, and people jostled each other on the narrow sidewalks, glasses clinking and laughter rising above the din. David and his friends had come from Memphis for the weekend, thinking they'd escape the monotony of their daily lives with a night of revelry. He loved the city, the way it pulsed with energy, the sense that anything could happen here. But that night, something in the air felt wrong, though he couldn't tell if it was the cold or the strange unease gnawing at the edge of his mind. They had been wandering Bourbon Street for hours, hopping from bar to bar, drinking shots and dancing in the crowded streets. Around midnight, the crowd thickened, and the city seemed to vibrate with anticipation. David felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, like being watched, but every time he looked, he saw nothing unusual, just the sea of masked faces and tourists, all caught up in the celebration. His friend, Kyle, nudged him. "Come on, man, let's get a better spot to watch the countdown." They moved toward the Mississippi River, where a stage had been set up for fireworks. The closer they got, the more David noticed something odd. A man, standing still, leaning against a lamppost, watching them. He was dressed in a black coat, a scarf pulled tight around his neck, and a hat that shadowed his eyes. There was nothing particularly threatening about him, until David caught the way he smiled. It was slow, deliberate, and wrong, like he knew something no one else did. "Who's that?" David asked, pointing. Kyle shrugged. "Don't know. Probably some drunk trying to scare people." David tried to dismiss it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every time he looked, the man was there, silent, smiling, and no matter where David or his friends moved, the man seemed to stay the same distance away, as if the crowd parted for him alone. Minutes ticked by. The countdown began. People cheered, fireworks erupted over the river, and David forced himself to smile and clap, but he couldn't take his eyes off the figure. Then he noticed something stranger, the man's shadow. It stretched unnaturally, twisting across the cobblestones in a way shadows didn't normally move. It was alive, snaking toward David. He blinked, and the man was gone. David shook his head, trying to laugh it off. Too much beer, that's all. But when he looked back toward the street, the man was standing closer now, and the shadow reached across the crowd, brushing against his feet like smoke. Panic surged through David. "We need to get out of here," he whispered to Kyle. But when he turned, his friends weren't with him. The crowd had shifted, swallowing them up. He stumbled, trying to push through, but every turn led him deeper into the mass of people. And through it all, he could feel the man's gaze, unblinking, following him. Then the music stopped. The fireworks faded. Time seemed to pause, and David realized the street was empty, eerily empty, except for him and the figure in black. No cars, no laughter, no other pedestrians. Just him and that smile. Who are you?" David's voice cracked. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, dragging his shadow behind him, stretching it like a liquid reaching for David. It moved faster than it should, crawling along the ground and up the walls, filling the street with darkness. David ran, heart hammering, but every alley led him back to the same spot. The man was always there, the shadow coiling around his legs like tendrils. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. He pounded on doors, begged for help, but the city remained silent, frozen in some twisted reflection of reality. Then the man raised his hand, pointing directly at David. The shadow surged, and the world went black. When David opened his eyes, he was lying on the riverbank, water lapping against his legs, and the crowd had returned. Music blared, people laughed, and fireworks painted the sky in streaks of red and gold. It was as if nothing had happened, except the feeling of being watched lingered, heavy in his chest. He staggered to his friends, who were all smiling, none of them aware he had vanished for several minutes. Kyle laughed. "Dude, you passed out. You scared the hell out of us." David forced a laugh, trying to mask the terror, but he knew better. Something had been with him, something that didn't belong in this world. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Back at their hotel, David couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the man in black in every reflective surface, in every shadow, a grin stretching wider than it should, waiting. He tried to convince himself it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and alcohol. But over the next few days, subtle things began to change. Shadows moved on their own in hotel hallways. Doors that should have been closed were slightly ajar, and sometimes in the middle of the night, David would hear the faintest whisper, like a voice coming from nowhere calling his name. On the last night of their trip, David decided to leave Bourbon Street early, avoiding the crowd. As he walked alone, the streets empty and wet from a recent rain, he felt it. Again. That prickling, crawling sensation, like someone was right behind him. He spun around, and there was the man, standing under a flickering streetlight, hat low, shadows stretching across the wet cobblestones, reaching for him. David ran faster than he had ever run in his life. The streets twisted unnaturally. Familiar turns became impossible to navigate, and the shadow followed, swallowing the light around him. He tripped, skidding across the wet pavement, and when he looked up, the man was looming above him, impossibly tall, impossibly dark. David tried to cry out, but no sound came, and then the shadow surged into him, cold and heavy, filling his chest and lungs. He blacked out. When he woke, it was morning. He was lying in his hotel room bed, drenched in sweat. The city outside was calm, bustling with tourists, no trace of the previous night's horror. His friends were gone, out exploring. David's phone buzzed with messages, New Year greetings, photos of their night, but he couldn't bring himself to look at them. He left New Orleans the next day, but the man didn't leave him. Every night, when the world grew quiet, David would see him in the corners of rooms, outside windows, always at a distance, always watching. And every New Year's Eve, without fail, David would wake up at 11:59 p.m., heart pounding, knowing that the man in black was waiting for him again. Some nights David wakes to whispers in the dark, promises he doesn't understand, warnings he can't escape. The city streets, the celebrations, the crowds, all of it feels distant, a fragile illusion. The truth is, the man doesn't need the crowd, doesn't need the city. He only needs time. And on New Year's Eve, time is thin. David never goes out on New Year's Eve anymore. He locks doors, draws blinds, and tries not to look at the shadows, but he knows deep down that the man is patient. He always waits. And one day, David fears he will not just be watching. Story the end. The small town of Ashford, Michigan, was buried under a thick layer of snow as New Year's Eve descended, quiet and still, almost deceptively peaceful. Most of the residents were tucked inside their homes, waiting for the stroke of midnight to usher in a new year. But at the edge of town, along the frozen banks of the Cedar River, the old Wexler house stood silent, its windows dark and shuttered. No one had lived there for years, not since old man Wexler disappeared one winter night decades ago. The house had a reputation, whispered about in town, doors that slammed on their own, flickering lights, shadows moving behind curtained windows, but tonight it was to host the party that everyone in Ashford had been talking about. Cameron Hayes and his friends had found the house a month earlier while exploring the outskirts of town. It was perfect. Large, secluded, and entirely off the grid. Cameron, 22, with a thrill-seeker streak that often got him into trouble, was the one who suggested they throw a New Year's Eve party there. His friends, mostly college students home for the holidays, were eager. It wasn't often they got the chance to host a party without parents, neighbors, or the police lurking around. By the time they arrived, snow was falling steadily, and the wind had begun to howl through the skeletal trees lining the driveway. Cameron parked his Jeep near the sagging front porch, and the group trudged through the snow, laughing and carrying bags of snacks and boxes of beer. The air was sharp and bitter, biting at exposed skin, but the excitement warmed them from within. No one noticed the faint scraping sound that seemed to come from the second-floor windows as they entered. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and decay. The floors creaked underfoot and cobwebs hung in every corner. Cameron flipped on a series of battery-powered lanterns which cast a dim, uneven light across the peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture. The living room was enormous, its high ceiling giving the space an eerie grandeur. Cameron's friend, Rachel, wrinkled her nose at the smell. "I don't know about this place," she said. "It feels off." Cameron waved her concerns away with a laugh, insisting it was perfect for a haunted New Year's Eve party. Everyone else shrugged, caught up in the thrill. By 9 o'clock, the party was in full swing. People from all over town had shown up, drawn by Cameron's insistence on secrecy and adventure. The music was loud, bouncing off the walls, mingling with laughter and chatter. They played drinking games, danced around the dusty living room, and explored the house in groups, daring each other to go to the basement or upstairs bedrooms. Cameron, feeling invincible, decided to investigate the master bedroom on the second floor. According to local legend, it was the room where Wexler had been last seen. The stairs groaned under their weight, and the wooden banister felt slimy from decades of neglect. The hallway was lined with faded photographs of unknown faces, some of which appeared to be watching them. Cameron's friends, Mark and Lisa, hesitated at the threshold of the bedroom. "You don't really want to go in there," Mark warned, but Cameron pushed past him, flashlight in hand. The door swung open with an agonizing creak, revealing a room frozen in time. Furniture was covered with dusty sheets, and a thick layer of frost coated the window. A cold breeze drifted through the cracked panes, making the candle flames on the dresser flicker wildly. That's when they heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whispering coming from the far corner of the room. At first, Cameron thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder, forming words. "Get out, before." The voice was high, ragged, and desperate, cutting through the laughter and music from downstairs. Cameron's flashlight flickered, plunging them into a brief darkness that made their hearts pound. When the light returned, there was a figure standing near the window, a shadowy, humanoid shape that seemed to move unnaturally. Mark yelped, and Lisa grabbed his arm, but Cameron was frozen, unable to look away. The figure dissolved like smoke, leaving only the cold chill that clung to the room. By 11, the party was growing wilder. Most people had ignored the strange events, attributing them to nerves or overactive imaginations, but Cameron couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Guests began reporting things, objects moving on their own, lights flickering without cause, cold spots that appeared suddenly and lingered. One of Cameron's friends, Tyler, claimed he had seen someone standing at the top of the stairs, dressed in tattered clothing and staring with empty black eyes. When the group rushed to check, the stairs were empty. As midnight approached, the tension escalated. Cameron tried to maintain control, insisting everyone gather for the countdown. They huddled in the living room, glasses raised, hearts pounding from both fear and excitement. 10, 9, 8. Outside, a storm had picked up, snow whipping against the windows. By the time they reached one, the wind was howling, the house groaning as if it were alive. When the clock struck 12, Cameron felt a sudden, bone-chilling cold. The lanterns flickered violently, and for a brief moment, the music stopped. The laughter died, leaving only the sound of the storm and the creaking house. Then the screaming started. It began at the back of the house, a sharp, piercing sound that made everyone's blood run cold. People scrambled, trying to locate the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Cameron grabbed a lantern and ran toward the sound, finding the basement door shaking as though something inside were pushing against it. He called out for his friends, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. The whispers returned, louder this time, forming coherent words. "Leave, now, or join him." Panic erupted. Guests tried to flee, but the snowstorm had made the driveway impassable. Tires spun uselessly in the icy drifts. Cameron grabbed Rachel's hand, urging her to the front door, only to find it locked from the outside, though no one could have done it. Windows refused to budge, frost coating the glass like a layer of ice too thick to penetrate. The shadows in the corners of the room lengthened and twisted, forming grotesque, crawling shapes. People screamed as they felt cold hands brush against them, that as if unseen entities were brushing past in the darkness. Cameron and his friends huddled together in the living room, the lanterns barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. The sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs, though they could see no one on the staircase. Tyler swore he saw the Wexler figure again, standing silently at the end of the hallway, watching them with hollow eyes. When anyone moved toward him, he vanished, leaving only the sensation of being watched, hunted, and trapped. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed meaningless. Every attempt to leave was met with resistance. Doors that wouldn't open, windows that wouldn't budge, the cold that seeped into their bones. Guests began to disappear one by one, leaving only Cameron and a small handful of friends. They heard whispers directly in their ears now, words of threat and warning, urging them to leave before it was too late. But leave where? The storm had erased every familiar landmark, and the house seemed to stretch endlessly, rooms appearing and disappearing as if the structure itself were alive. By dawn, the storm had abated. Cameron staggered outside, dragging Rachel with him, and the rest of the surviving guests followed. The house behind them stood silent, dark, and seemingly ordinary. When they turned to look back, the frost, the shadows, the strange phenomena, all were gone. It was just an abandoned house, decrepit and lifeless. No one spoke of what had happened inside. The snow covered the tracks, and the memories of the night became fragmented, like a bad dream. Cameron never returned to the Wexler house, nor did anyone else. But every year, as New Year's Eve approached, he would feel the chill in his spine, remember the whispers in the darkness, and see those hollow eyes in his mind's corner. And in the quiet moments when the wind howled just right, he could swear he heard them again, calling his name, reminding him that some doors, once opened, never truly close. Story the end. The air was thick with the kind of cold that made your lungs burn and your teeth chatter. In the small town of Willow Creek, Illinois, New Year's Eve had always been quiet, a mix of families watching fireworks from porches and a few parties scattered across town. That year, though, something felt different. There was an uneasy stillness to the streets, a sense that everyone had forgotten to breathe. It started at around 9 o'clock, when Sarah and her friends, 4 of them from high school, decided to drive out to the old Thompson farm on the outskirts of town. It was abandoned, overgrown, and had a reputation for being haunted, but they thought it would be fun to spend a few hours there before the town's official celebrations. Their headlights cut through the dark like knives, illuminating twisted branches and piles of rotting leaves. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Ryan asked from the back seat, his voice tight. He was always the cautious one, the kind who double-checked locks and wore a seatbelt even when no one was looking. "It'll be fine," Sarah replied, gripping the wheel. "It's just an old farm. Nobody's here, and we'll be back before midnight." The van rumbled over a pothole, and a shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The woods on either side of the road seemed darker than they should have been, black gaps in the night that swallowed their headlights. She told herself it was just her imagination. When they arrived, the Thompson house loomed in front of them. The windows were broken, the roof sagging, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. They parked the van on the side of the road and got out, the cold immediately biting at their skin. "This is creepy," whispered Jenna, pulling her coat tighter. "Why did we come here again?" "Because it's Halloween in December," Alex said, smirking. "Just admit it. You wanted to see if it's haunted." They laughed nervously and made their way inside. The floorboards groaned under their weight, dust and mold floating in the air. In the main room, they found old furniture, long decayed, and a fireplace filled with ash. On the wall, a faded photograph of a family stared at them. Their eyes seemed almost alive. "Okay, this is officially terrifying," Ryan muttered. "Can we leave now?" Sarah laughed. "It's just a house. Look, we'll explore a little and then go." They moved through the house, flashlight beams cutting across peeling wallpaper and broken mirrors. Then they heard it, a soft thud from upstairs. "What was that?" Jenna whispered, freezing. "Probably just a raccoon or something," Alex said, but even he sounded unsure. They climbed the stairs slowly. Each step groaned under their weight, echoing in the empty house. At the top, a long hallway stretched before them, doors on either side. The thudding continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone walking heavily in the next room. "Maybe we shouldn't be here," Ryan said again. They reached the last door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar. The thudding grew louder. Sarah pushed it open, and the flashlight revealed a small room, empty except for an old rocking chair. The chair moved back and forth on its own, slowly, steadily. "Oh my God," Jenna whispered, stepping back. Suddenly, the front door slammed with a deafening bang, and the house seemed to groan around them. The rocking chair jerked violently, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. They fumbled, trying to turn them back on, but the batteries were dead. Panic set in. Sarah grabbed Jenna's arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." As they ran down the stairs, a low, guttural growl filled the house. It wasn't an animal. It was too human, yet distorted, like someone screaming from deep within their chest. They burst out of the front door into the snow-covered yard, gasping for air. Then they saw them. Figures, at first like shadows, were emerging from the tree line. Not human, not entirely, but something in between. Their limbs were elongated, their heads twisted at odd angles. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight. They moved with a fluidity that was impossible, gliding across the snow silently but quickly. "Run!" Sarah shouted, and they sprinted toward the van. When they reached the road, they realized it wasn't there. The van had vanished. In its place was a patch of snow, undisturbed except for their footprints leading up to it. Panic turned to terror. "What the hell?" Alex yelled. The figures moved closer, surrounding them now. Their faces, or what passed for faces, were human enough to recognize, but distorted, mouths stretched too wide, eyes hollow, skin pale and cracked. They didn't speak. They just watched, waiting. Ryan tripped and fell. One of the figures knelt, tilting its head unnaturally to look at him. It reached out, a hand that seemed too long, too thin, and Ryan screamed as it touched his shoulder. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared. The group ran blindly, slipping on ice and snow, desperate for any sign of civilization. The trees seemed endless, closing in around them. They found an old service road and followed it, hoping to reach the main highway. Hours passed, the snow thickened. Their phones had no signal. Hunger and cold began to gnaw at them. All the while, the figures stalked from the edges of their vision, always just out of reach, never fully leaving. Finally, around 3 a.m., they saw the lights of a diner up ahead. Salvation, they thought. But as they approached, the doors swung open on their own, revealing not warmth, but emptiness. Inside, the booths were overturned, tables broken, and the smell of decay was thick in the air. Then they saw the bodies, human bodies slumped across the floor, eyes wide open, faces frozen in terror. And then movement. They lifted their heads slowly, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes following the group. "Back!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The bodies moved faster than humanly possible, and the figures outside the diner joined in. The friends were surrounded. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her side and fell to the ground. Alex grabbed her hand, trying to pull her up, but the snow beneath them shifted in impossible ways. The figures were everywhere now, some reaching through walls, some emerging from the ceiling. The growls, the screeches, the unnatural sounds filled the space, disorienting them completely. Ryan was dragged into the shadows, screaming. Jenna tried to pull him back, but hands, dozens of hands, grabbed at her, cold and unyielding. She kicked and clawed, screaming herself, but the darkness swallowed them. And then, silence. The first person to wake was Jenna. She was lying on the snow-covered road, dawn breaking over Willow Creek. Her friends were gone. The diner, the house, the figures, everything had vanished. She ran back to town, screaming, but nobody heard her. It was as if the town had erased the events of the night, leaving only her memory. She told the police, the fire department, anyone who would listen, but no trace of the Thompson farm, the diner, or her friends remained. Even her van was gone. They assumed she'd had a breakdown, the trauma of New Year's Eve, exaggerating fear into hallucination. But Jenna knew the truth. Every year, someone disappeared in Willow Creek on New Year's Eve. Every year, the shadows waited, and every year someone else saw the figures, knew the terror, and lived to tell it, though they could never forget it. She never went near the outskirts of town again. Every New Year's Eve, she stayed inside, lights blazing, doors locked. She could still hear them sometimes in the wind, in the snapping of branches outside. Shadows that shouldn't exist, waiting for the next unlucky soul to wander into their path. She would never forget their eyes, hollow, twisted, glowing faintly in the snow, always watching, always waiting. Story the end. It was New Year's Eve in the small town of Hanover, Pennsylvania, and the air was sharp with winter cold, the kind that made every breath sting and every movement slow. Streets were quiet, except for the occasional car passing by, headlights cutting through the thick darkness. Most people were inside, celebrating with friends and family, but for Kyle and his brother Adam, the night was just beginning. Kyle had just turned 24 and had a habit of seeking out adventures that teetered on the edge of danger. Adam, 2 years younger, had never been one to back down, even when Kyle's ideas seemed reckless. That night, Kyle had convinced him to come along to a place no one dared to visit, the abandoned Hanover Hospital on the outskirts of town. Closed in the early 1990s after a series of unexplained deaths and rumored malpractice cover-ups, the hospital had been left to rot. Stories circulated of patients wandering the hallways after hours, of ghostly screams echoing through empty rooms, and of shadows that moved on their own. "You're actually serious about this?" Adam asked as they approached the rusted chain-link fence surrounding the property. The moonlight reflected off the icy patches on the ground, making the snow-covered field look almost otherworldly. "Absolutely," Kyle said, pulling a crowbar from his backpack to lift the lock on the gate. "If we wait until morning, it'll be full of cops and kids with cameras. Tonight, it's just us. Think about it. This is legendary." Adam shook his head but followed, stepping carefully through the icy grass. They reached the hospital building, a hulking structure with broken windows and peeling paint. The front entrance doors were locked, so Kyle forced open a side door with the crowbar. The hinges groaned, echoing down the empty hall. Inside, the air was thick with decay. Dust hung in clouds around their flashlights, and the faint smell of mold and rust filled their nostrils. The walls were lined with faded paint, some scrawled over with graffiti left by kids and thrill-seekers over the years. Broken tiles crunched underfoot. "Stay close," Kyle whispered. "We don't want to get lost in here." They walked cautiously down the main corridor. Every sound seemed amplified. Their boots on the floor, the dripping of water from the ceiling, the distant creak of metal. They reached the nurse's station, a long desk covered in dust and debris. Kyle picked up a small notebook, the pages yellowed and brittle. "Look at this," he said, flipping through it. "Patient logs. Someone was keeping records up until the day it closed." Adam leaned over, reading a name. "Patient 217, admitted December 30th, 1991. Cause of death, unknown." Another page read, "Patient 219, admitted December 31st, 1991. Found unresponsive in bed." "Why are all the deaths clustered around New Year's Eve?" Adam asked, unease creeping into his voice. Kyle shrugged, but his hand was trembling slightly. "Probably just a coincidence." They moved deeper into the hospital, into the wing that had once been the intensive care unit. The hallway narrowed, and the walls were lined with doors, many hanging off their hinges. Kyle tried one. It swung open with a loud creak, revealing a room filled with broken beds and overturned wheelchairs. The air here was colder, sharper, and Kyle felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. "That's weird," Adam said. "It's freezing in here, but the heating's off. How does that even work?" Kyle didn't answer. He was too focused on the sound that had just reached their ears, a soft whisper, like someone talking just beyond the walls. They froze. "Did you hear that?" Adam whispered. "Probably just the wind," Kyle replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. Words they couldn't fully make out, but they sounded urgent, almost angry. Kyle shined his flashlight down the hallway, and in the beam of light he thought he saw movement, a shadow flitting across the floor, faster than it should have been. "Let's get out of here," Adam said suddenly, panic creeping into his tone. "No way," Kyle replied, but even he was starting to feel the fear. "We came all this way. Let's just check the next room, and then we leave." The next room was the old pediatric ward. Tiny beds lined the walls, and toys were scattered across the floor, coated in decades of dust. As Kyle stepped in, his flashlight caught on something that made his stomach drop, a small, hand-drawn picture pinned to the wall. It was a family, smiling, but the faces were scratched out with deep red lines. Below it, scrawled in uneven letters, was "Do not leave us alone." Adam grabbed Kyle's arm. "Dude, seriously, that's enough. Let's go." Kyle hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. They turned to leave, but as they reached the hallway, they saw them, figures thin and pale emerging from the shadows. Children, no older than 10, their faces pale and eyes black voids. They didn't speak, but moved with jerky, unnatural motions. Adam screamed, pulling Kyle toward the exit, but the hallway seemed to stretch, the exit growing impossibly far. The figures multiplied, appearing in rooms, behind corners, in every doorway. The whispers were now a chorus, growing louder, more demanding. "Stay with us, stay." They ran blindly, slipping on the wet floor, their breaths ragged. Every turn led to another hallway, another cluster of ghostly children blocking their path. Kyle felt hands brush against his shoulders, ice cold and insistent, but when he spun around, there was nothing there. Finally, they stumbled into the main lobby, where the front doors were locked tight. Kyle banged on the glass, yelling, but no sound seemed to reach the outside world. The whispers intensified, now all around them, echoing off the walls. Shadows began to stretch and twist across the floor, forming shapes that were almost human, almost real. Adam grabbed Kyle, trying to pull him toward the stairwell that led to the basement. Maybe we can find another way out. They descended, the stairs groaning under their weight. The basement was worse, dark, damp, filled with old medical equipment that had long since rusted beyond recognition. And then Kyle saw it, a figure at the far end of the room, a man in a tattered hospital gown, standing perfectly still. His head was tilted unnaturally to the side, and his eyes, they weren't eyes at all, just black pits staring straight through Kyle. What are you? Kyle whispered, frozen. The figure tilted its head further, then started walking toward them with slow, deliberate steps. Every step made the floor vibrate slightly, as if the building itself were alive. Behind them, Adam screamed and tried to run, but the shadows had already reached for him, cold, grasping hands that pulled him into the darkness. Kyle turned to run, but the basement seemed endless. Every door he opened led to another identical hallway, another cluster of shadows. He could hear Adam screaming somewhere far away, the sound fading into the whispers. And then he saw her, a small girl standing in the middle of the hallway, her skin gray, hair matted, eyes black as night. She raised her hand, beckoning him closer. "Stay, with us," she whispered. Kyle stumbled back, panicked, and then he felt it. A hand on his shoulder, icy and unyielding. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The hallway seemed to close in around him, the shadows pressing closer, the whispers growing deafening. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time had lost all meaning. And then, as the clock in the town struck midnight, the world outside the hospital went silent. The whispers stopped, the shadows receded, and Kyle found himself alone in the basement, Adam gone, the building dark and empty. He staggered outside, the snow crunching beneath his boots, gasping for air. The hospital loomed behind him, silent, abandoned, as if nothing had ever happened. Kyle ran all the way back to town, but the memory of the figures, the whispers, and Adam's screams never left him. No one believed his story. Adam was never found, and the Hanover Hospital remained empty, decaying, a place everyone avoided. Every New Year's Eve, Kyle could feel it. The cold, the whispers calling his name, promising that next year they would find him again. He never went near the hospital again, but sometimes in the dead of night, he could hear faint footsteps in the snow outside his window and the voice of a little girl whispering, "Stay with us." Story the end. The snow fell in thick, heavy flakes that New Year's Eve, blanketing the small town of Millfield, Ohio, in a silence that seemed unnatural. The streets were empty, except for a few brave souls heading to the town square for the annual fireworks. For most, it was just another celebration, fireworks, champagne, and a chance to reset the year. But for Mark Jensen, it was a night that would haunt him forever. Mark had recently moved back to Millfield after a long stint working in Chicago. His apartment overlooked an alley behind an old diner, a place that smelled perpetually of grease and burnt coffee. That evening, he had invited two old friends, Derek and Clara, to celebrate with him. The three of them hadn't seen each other in years, and the nostalgia of their youth made the prospect of ringing in the new year together too tempting to resist. The apartment was small, cramped with a worn sofa and a kitchen that had seen better days, but it had a view of the town's fireworks from the living room window. They spent the evening drinking cheap whiskey, reminiscing about high school pranks, and joking about the town's strange stories. The burned-out farmhouse on the outskirts, the disappearances no one ever talked about. As midnight approached, the three of them decided to step outside onto Mark's small balcony to watch the fireworks. The town square was alive with laughter, music, and the faint scent of firecrackers. But there was something else in the air, something sharp and biting beyond the cold winter wind. "Did you hear that?" Clara asked suddenly, pausing mid-sentence. "Hear what?" Derek said, looking around. "There, behind the diner," she whispered, pointing toward the alley that ran between the diner and the old grocery store. Mark squinted. There was nothing visible, just shadows stretching along the narrow space. "Probably just some drunk kids," he said, trying to dismiss it. But a tight knot of unease formed in his stomach. The fireworks exploded in the sky, showering colors over the town, and for a moment the sense of dread faded. But when the last firework boomed, the alley seemed darker than before, as if it had swallowed the light entirely. "Let's just finish our drinks inside." Mark suggested. They went back into the apartment, laughing nervously, but the sense that something was watching them didn't leave. Hours later, after Derek had left and Clara had gone home, Mark was alone, scrolling through his phone, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling gnawing at him. Then he heard it, a faint scratching coming from the alley below. At first, he thought it was a rat or some loose debris in the wind, but the scratching grew louder, more deliberate. Mark's heart began to race. He went to the window and leaned out, shining his flashlight down the alley. There was nothing at first, just the piles of snow and trash. Then he saw movement, a figure at the far end, standing perfectly still, staring at the building. He froze. The figure was unnaturally thin, wearing a long coat, and its face was hidden in shadow. Mark blinked, and when he looked again, it was gone. Shaking, he closed the curtains and tried to convince himself it was his imagination. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figure at the alley's end, always watching. The scratching returned intermittently, like fingernails on wood, keeping him on edge. Around 2 a.m., Mark finally got up to get a glass of water. He glanced out the window one more time and froze. There it was again, closer this time, emerging from the darkness, moving slowly, deliberately, like it knew exactly where he was. Mark's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't be awake." He dropped the phone. Heart hammering, he checked the locks on his door. All were secured. The figure was gone again, but he could feel it. The room seemed colder, the shadows longer, stretching unnaturally. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. A slow, deliberate knock. Mark froze. "Who's there?" he called, voice shaking. No answer, just another knock, louder this time. He tried calling Clara, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He grabbed a kitchen knife and approached the door cautiously. The knock came again, followed by a whisper, faint like someone breathing right next to him. "Open up." Mark stumbled back. The doorknob rattled violently as if someone or something was trying to break in. He backed into the corner, knife raised, trembling. The whispers grew louder, overlapping like dozens of voices calling his name. Then silence. Mark thought he might have imagined it, but when he peeked through the peephole, the hallway outside was empty. No sign of anyone. He exhaled shakily, trying to calm himself. Then his phone buzzed again. "Don't look outside." Panic surged. Mark's eyes were drawn back to the window. Outside in the alley, dozens of shadows were moving now, emerging from the dark corners between the buildings. They didn't run. They didn't move like people. They drifted, silently, toward his building. Their faces were blank, expressionless, but he could feel their attention focused on him. He tried to call 911, but the line was dead. The landline, the cell phone, everything was dead. The shadows reached the bottom of his building. One climbed the fire escape. Mark stumbled back in horror as it emerged onto the balcony below his. It looked up at him, and in a flash, he saw its face, pale, stretched unnaturally, mouth open in a silent scream. Mark ran for the door to the stairwell. He could hear the scraping of nails against the balcony floor as more figures appeared, climbing, moving with impossible speed. He slammed the door shut behind him and ran down the stairs, heart hammering. The stairwell felt endless. Every landing he passed, the shadows seemed to wait, lurking in the corners. When he finally reached the ground floor, the lobby was dark and empty. The front door to the street was locked. The building, which had always been open, now seemed like a trap. Then he heard the elevator. The doors creaked open, and the same thin figure from the alley stepped out, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes glinting in the dim light. Mark ran, back toward the fire exit. As he opened the door to the alley, the snow was gone. The alley was black, empty, endless. He turned to run down the street, but it twisted impossibly, leading him back to the same spot over and over. Mark realized he wasn't in the real world anymore. The streets of Millfield had shifted, become a maze. The shadows followed, whispering, laughing, calling his name. His legs burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. Every window he passed showed the same pale faces, pressed against glass, staring at him with hollow eyes. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time had no meaning. Mark could only run, always running, always watched, always hunted. And then he saw her. Clara, standing in the distance. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Behind her, more faces emerged. Friends, strangers, all frozen in a silent scream. Mark screamed, but the sound didn't escape. The whispers grew louder until it was all he could hear. He stumbled, fell, and when he looked up, the shadows were around him, closing in. The last thing he saw was the thin figure from the alley, reaching for him with impossibly long fingers when his face twisted in that silent scream. When the townspeople woke the next morning, the snow had stopped falling. The streets were calm, normal, peaceful. Mark Jensen's apartment was empty. No signs of struggle, no notes, no bodies. Just a faint, lingering smell of burnt coffee and something else, something metallic, like blood. Every New Year's Eve since, people in Millfield have reported hearing scratching in the alleys, whispers behind closed doors, shadows moving against the snow. Some say if you look too long out of your window at midnight, you can see the figures waiting, watching for the next person to ring in the year alone. Mark Jensen was never seen again. Story. The end. I used to think New Year's Eve was harmless, loud, messy, full of bad decisions and cheap champagne, but ultimately safe. People want to celebrate beginnings, not endings. That belief lasted until the night I drove north on Route 17 with 4 other people in my car and learned how thin the line is between celebration and disaster. This happened years ago, but I still measure time by before and after that night. We were in upstate New York, the kind of area where cell service fades without warning and pine trees close in on the road like walls. I was 26, working construction during the day and bartending on weekends. New Year's Eve was supposed to be easy money. My girlfriend at the time, Rachel, convinced me to skip my shift and go to a house party instead. Her friend, Evan, had a cabin near a frozen lake, and a bunch of people were driving up from the city. There were 5 of us in my car. Me driving, Rachel in the passenger seat, Evan behind me, and 2 of Rachel's coworkers, Melissa and Tom, squeezed into the back. We left late, already irritated with each other. Snow had started falling harder than predicted, thick wet flakes that smeared across the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. The radio kept cutting out. Every station was either static or playing countdown music with obnoxious hosts yelling about fresh starts. Rachel turned it off, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. About 40 minutes in, Evan noticed headlights behind us. "They've been there a while," he said. I checked the rearview mirror. A single pair of headlights, far back but steady, matching our speed. "It's a road," I said. "Cars do that." Still, I sped up a little. The headlights sped up too. Tom joked that it was probably some drunk trying to race us, and Melissa laughed too loud, like she was nervous. Rachel reached over and turned the radio back on, then turned it off again when nothing but static came through. The road narrowed, trees pressing closer, snow piling along the shoulders. I slowed down because I couldn't see past the next curve. The headlights behind us stayed just as far back as before, not gaining, not falling away. That's when Evan said, "They're not passing." I hadn't realized how odd that was until he said it. The road had plenty of straight stretches. Anyone stuck behind us for that long would have gone around. "Maybe they're waiting for a clear spot," Rachel said, but she didn't sound convinced. A mile later, we came up on a turnout near an old snowmobile trail. I pulled over, partly to let the car behind us pass and partly to settle my nerves. The headlights slowed, then stopped on the road behind us. They didn't pass. We sat there, engine idling, breath fogging the windows. "Why aren't they going?" Melissa whispered. I put the car back into gear and pulled onto the road again. The headlights followed. At that point, no one was laughing anymore. The GPS on my phone froze, the little arrow spinning uselessly. Evan tried his phone too. No service. Rachel asked if we should turn around. I shook my head. Going back meant another hour on dark roads, and I didn't want to admit I was scared. The headlights crept closer. Not fast, just closer. Then they flicked off. The road behind us went black. I slowed to a crawl, heart pounding. I checked the mirror again and again, expecting the lights to flare back on, but there was nothing. Just darkness and falling snow. "Maybe they turned off," Tom said. "Or maybe they turned off their lights," Evan replied. We drove in silence for several minutes. I started to relax, convincing myself we were paranoid. Then as we rounded a bend, something loomed in the road ahead. I slammed the brakes. A car sat sideways across the lane, light half buried in snow, hazard lights blinking weakly. Its front end was smashed into a tree. Steam rose from under the hood. "Holy shit," Rachel said. I pulled over and got out despite everyone telling me not to. The cold hit like a punch. Snow soaked through my boots instantly. As I approached the wreck, I called out, asking if anyone was inside. No answer. The driver's door was open. The interior light flickered. There was blood on the steering wheel, dark and already drying. That's when I noticed the footprints. They led away from the car and into the woods. Barefoot footprints. I backed away slowly and hurried back to my car, telling everyone what I saw. Melissa started crying. Tom kept saying we should leave. Just go. Just drive. Before I could put the car in gear, headlights flared behind us again, blindingly bright. The same car, or at least I think it was the same car. It pulled up behind us and stopped so close I could see the cracked plastic of its grille through the snow. One headlight was dimmer than the other. The driver's side mirror hung loose. Rachel screamed. I threw the car into drive and fishtailed back onto the road, barely missing the wrecked car. The headlights followed immediately. No hesitation. I drove faster than I should have, the speedometer creeping higher while the road grew slicker. The car behind us stayed close, too close. Its headlights filled the back window, washing the inside of our car in harsh white light. Evan turned around in his seat, pressing his face to the glass. "There's someone in the back seat," he said. "What?" I yelled. "In their car. There's someone back there." I risked another glance in the mirror. For a split second, I saw a shape in the back seat of the car behind us, sitting upright, unmoving. No headrest, no movement, just a silhouette. Rachel begged me to stop, said we should pull into the next house or building, but there were no houses, no lights, just trees and snow and the road disappearing ahead of us. The clock on the dashboard read 11:57 p.m. The car behind us revved its engine and surged forward, tapping our bumper hard enough to jolt us. Melissa screamed again. Tom swore and braced himself against the seat. I pressed the gas, tires slipping, the engine whining. The road curved sharply, and I barely made it around without spinning out. The car behind us clipped the snowbank, sending up a spray of powder, but it stayed with us. Then, just ahead, I saw a set of flashing lights, red and blue. A state trooper cruiser sat on the shoulder, angled toward the road. I laid on the horn, waving one hand out the window as we approached. The car behind us slowed. As we passed the cruiser, the headlights vanished again, like someone had flipped a switch. I pulled over so hard I nearly slid into the ditch. The trooper jumped out, hand on his holster, scanning the road behind us. "Are you okay?" he asked. We all started talking at once. I told him everything, the following car, the wreck, the footprints, the person in the back seat. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he looked down the road behind us. "There's no other car," he said. "That's impossible," Evan said. "It was right there." The trooper walked a few yards down the shoulder, shining his flashlight along the road and into the trees. He came back shaking his head. "There was an accident reported earlier tonight," he said. "Car slid off the road about 3 miles back. Driver died at the scene." Rachel grabbed my arm. "But we just saw it." The trooper hesitated, then sighed. "They say sometimes," he said slowly, "people see things out here. Shock. Weather. Long night." "What about the footprints?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "They never found the body," he said. "Just the car." Midnight came and went without any celebration. No countdown. No fireworks. Just the sound of wind in the trees and the cruiser's engine idling. The trooper followed us the rest of the way to Evan's cabin. We didn't see another car the entire drive. We didn't party. We didn't drink. We sat around the table in silence until dawn, jumping at every noise outside. In the morning, the trooper came back to check on us. He said they'd closed the road overnight due to conditions. When I asked how he'd been parked out there if the road was closed, he didn't answer directly. I drove home later that day alone. On the way, I passed the spot where we'd seen the wreck. There was nothing there. No broken tree, no skid marks, no sign of an accident, just untouched snow. I don't celebrate New Year's Eve anymore. I stay inside, away from roads and countdowns and the idea that time resets cleanly at midnight. Some things don't end when they're supposed to. Story, the end. It was the kind of New Year's Eve that felt too quiet for a party. The sky over Cleveland gray and heavy, a light snow falling that barely stuck to the ground. I had agreed to go to a house party with my friend Mark, mostly out of guilt for missing him over the holidays, and because I knew the alternative was sitting alone in my apartment with a bottle of wine and bad reality TV. I shouldn't have gone. I should have stayed home. Mark's friend, someone named Lacey, had rented a small house on the edge of Lakewood, the kind of place with peeling paint on the porch and a sagging roof that looked like it might collapse under the weight of snow. She promised a big crowd, music, and that people would stick around until the countdown. When I arrived, the house looked half abandoned, the kind of place that might have been used for weekend rentals or college parties long ago. But the parking lot was full, and voices floated through the frosted windows, so I pushed my doubts aside. Inside, the house smelled like old carpet and cheap whiskey. Space heaters hummed in the corners, and the music was loud, a bass-heavy playlist that shook the floor. People were dancing, drinking, and shouting over each other, and I thought maybe it would be fun after all. But something felt off. Not threatening, exactly, just a subtle, creeping wrongness. I told myself it was just the house, the way old buildings echo, and I moved deeper into the crowd. By around 11 p.m., I realized Mark was gone. I assumed he had disappeared with someone he knew, probably Lacey. I tried calling him, but my phone had no signal. Weird, I thought, but the old houses around Lakewood often had spotty reception. I shoved it in my pocket, deciding I'd find him later. Around 11:30, the lights flickered. Not just once, but several times, each flash longer than the last. People laughed, blaming the wiring or the snow, but I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't just the lights, it was the shadows they cast, sharp, too deep, like they were hiding something. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. But then the music cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence that seemed to vibrate in my chest. I walked toward the kitchen to get a drink and found the room empty. No one was there. The hallway beyond it was dark, far darker than it should have been. I called Mark's name. Nothing, just the echo of my own voice. Then I heard it. A low, scraping sound from upstairs, like someone dragging a chair across the floor. I froze, convinced I was imagining it, but it didn't stop. Slowly, I walked toward the staircase, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had gone upstairs to puke. Maybe it was the wind rattling the old roof. But when I got to the top, the hall was empty. Every room was empty. The noise stopped the second I reached the end of the hall. I turned back, heart pounding, and noticed something that made my blood run cold. The front door was slightly ajar. I knew I hadn't left it open. I hadn't been near it since I came in. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. And then I realized the party sounds were gone, completely gone. No music, no laughter, no chatter, only the faint, cold whistle of air through cracks in the walls. I stepped outside, expecting to see cars and people, maybe someone calling my name. Nothing. The lot was empty. Not a single person, not a single car, just snow falling in the stillness. I called out for Mark. My voice sounded tinny, too small in the open night. I walked around the house, trying to find someone, anyone. The backyard sloped toward a small patch of woods, dark and silent. Then I saw it. The basement door, which I didn't remember being there. It was slightly open, and from the darkness came a faint, rhythmic tapping. I didn't want to go down, but something inside me, a mixture of fear and stubborn curiosity, pushed me forward. The basement smelled like damp concrete and something metallic. My flashlight caught the edge of a large, dark shape in the corner. I stepped closer, my breath quick in the cold air, and realized it was a figure. Mark. Or what looked like Mark. He was crouched against the wall, his eyes wide, unblinking, and he didn't move when I called his name. "Mark," I whispered, his mouth open, but no sound came out. His eyes rolled upward, reflecting the flashlight in a way that didn't look human. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, and the tapping started again, faster this time, echoing through the basement like a drum. I turned to run, and that's when I saw them, others, shapes, crouched, pale, unmoving against the walls, faces I recognized from the party. Friends, acquaintances, people I had known for years. Their eyes were blank, empty, and I could feel the wrongness radiating off them. I scrambled up the stairs, almost tripping over the last step. When I burst through the basement door into the main floor, I found the house different. The walls were darker, the furniture shifted, the air heavy, the music had started again, low and distorted like it was coming from underwater. I ran to the front door. It was no longer ajar. It was solid, unyielding. I tried the windows. They were all locked. I pounded on them, screaming, hoping someone outside would hear, but the snow muffled everything. Then I heard it, Laughter. Not from the party, not from the music, but deep, guttural laughter echoing through the walls. It moved around me, circling, shifting. My stomach turned. I realized that, however I had come in, there was no way out. I ran upstairs again, desperate, and found one of the bedrooms had a mirror. I almost didn't want to look, but I had to know. In the reflection, I saw myself, but wrong. My eyes were darker, my skin paler, and behind me, shadowy figures crowded the room. They were the partygoers, the people I had seen earlier, but their faces were twisted, as if some malice had replaced who they were. I turned away, gagging, and ran toward the attic. The stairs creaked under my weight, threatening to break, but I didn't care. In the attic, I found an old trunk, covered in dust and cobwebs. Inside were items I recognized, jackets, bags, and small personal effects of people who had attended the party. And then I saw a stack of Polaroids. Every photo was of the house, the rooms, the people, but not as they were now. They were frozen mid-action, terrified, screaming, eyes wide. I flipped through quickly and stopped. One photo was of me, taken from behind, no flash, no light, and in the background the same shadowy figures I had seen in the mirror. The clock downstairs began to chime midnight. I felt a cold weight pressing down like the house itself was breathing. The laughter grew louder, closer, and then, in a way I can't explain, the figures appeared behind me in the attic. I stumbled backward, the Polaroids scattering, and something grabbed my wrist. Cold, hard, unyielding. "Happy New Year," a voice whispered. Not Mark's, not anyone's. Something old, something hungry. The next thing I remember, I woke up on the side of the road, bare feet, frozen, my coat torn. Ambulance lights were flashing, and I was shaking uncontrollably. The EMTs told me I had wandered into traffic, hypothermic, incoherent. I asked about the party, about Mark, about everyone. They said there was no record of a party at that address, that the house had been condemned years ago after a fire that killed 12 people during a New Year's Eve celebration. No one survived. I moved away from Cleveland after that. I never celebrated New Year's Eve again. Every year when midnight approached, I felt it, the weight, the cold, the laughter. And every year I wonder if somewhere, in some twisted version of the world, the house waits, the shadows wait, the countdown waits, and if anyone goes there again, they'll never come back. Story the end. It was supposed to be a simple New Year's Eve. I was 27, living in a small town in upstate New York, and my friends had convinced me to come to a party at an old lake house a few towns over. I usually avoided these kinds of gatherings, the noise, the drinking, the forced cheer, but this year I thought maybe I needed to shake things up. The drive there in the late afternoon was normal enough. Snow had fallen earlier in the day, leaving the roads slick and sparkling under the pale winter sun. The lake house was isolated, tucked away at the end of a winding private road that ran through thick woods. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting everything in icy blues and grays. Inside, the place smelled of pine, alcohol, and smoke from the fireplace. About 30 people were scattered throughout the two-story cabin, wearing party hats and holding cups filled with red wine and cheap champagne. I greeted a few friends, hung my coat, and tried to blend in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was off. It was the kind of house that felt alive, in a subtle, uncomfortable way. The walls were covered with old wood paneling, the kind that creaked and groaned even when the wind was calm. The windows were thick and slightly warped, and the shadows from the fire flickered in strange shapes across the corners. I chalked it up to my imagination and went to get a drink. Around 10:30 p.m., a few of us decided to go outside to watch the fireworks from the lake. The snow was knee-deep in some spots, and the cold air bit through my jacket. The lake itself was frozen over, a smooth expanse of ice that reflected the night sky. We were laughing, tossing a football back and forth, when I noticed something moving on the far side of the lake. At first, I thought it was someone else arriving for the party, but the figure was too far away, standing completely still. I squinted, trying to make it out. It was tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like a dark coat or cloak. Its head moved slowly side to side, almost like it was scanning the shore, but the movement was unnatural, too jerky to be human. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was seeing things in the dark, the alcohol and fatigue playing tricks on me, but the others noticed too. One of my friends, Jake, pointed it out and said, It looked like a person, but none of us recognized anyone arriving. We went back inside, joking nervously about the lone party crasher. The party continued, music blaring and champagne flowing. At 11:30, we were all crowded in the living room, waiting for midnight. Somewhere around 11:45, I stepped out onto the back deck for a breath of air. That's when I heard it, the scraping sound. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the laughter and music, but it grew steadily. Slow, deliberate, like something was dragging along the snow. I froze, scanning the dark woods behind the house. The sound seemed to be coming from the edge of the tree line, moving closer. I called out, "Hello," but my voice was swallowed by the wind. The scraping stopped. I went back inside, trying to act normal. My friends were joking about fireworks, the countdown, the usual things, but I couldn't shake the unease. Something about that sound, the way it moved, felt intelligent, calculated. Midnight came and everyone cheered, clinking glasses and counting down. I tried to lose myself in the celebration, but my eyes kept drifting toward the windows. Outside, the tree line was black, silent, and foreboding. It wasn't until a few minutes after midnight that I realized something was wrong. I had stepped into the kitchen to grab another drink, and when I turned around, the living room was empty. I thought maybe people had gone to the balcony, but the doors were closed, locked from the inside. The music was still playing, but no one was there. I called out, my voice echoing strangely. "Hey, where did everyone go?" No answer. Then I saw it through the kitchen window. The figure from the lake standing at the edge of the woods behind the house. Only now, it wasn't alone. More shapes emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, all moving slowly toward the cabin. They didn't run. They didn't stumble. They glided, and the snow seemed to swallow their footsteps. I panicked, running to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The locks had been engaged from the outside. I ran to the back deck, hoping to climb down, but the railing was frozen over with ice, and the snow made footing treacherous. I could hear them then, soft, wet, scraping sounds on the wooden porch, moving closer. My heart was hammering in my chest. I tried to call 911, but my phone had no signal. The landline was dead. And then the power went out. The music stopped abruptly. The fireplace died. The entire house went black, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight on the snow outside. I backed into the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The scraping got louder, moving up the side of the house, circling around. I heard something tapping on the windows, slow and deliberate. 3 taps. I wanted to run, to hide, but the front door still wouldn't open. The back deck seemed like my only chance, even though the drop was dangerous. I opened the sliding glass door and slipped onto the deck, snow crunching under my boots. That's when I saw their faces, or what should have been faces. They were blank, pale, stretched unnaturally over bone, eyes too wide, mouths pulled into grim lines that didn't move when they should have. There were at least 6 of them now, surrounding the house, standing just beyond the reach of the moonlight. They didn't speak. They didn't move like humans. But I could feel their eyes on me. Every instinct screamed to run, but the snow made it impossible to sprint. I stumbled, falling hard onto my side, and then I heard it. A voice, low, raspy, coming from the figure closest to me. "Happy New Year." I scrambled to my feet, running blindly through the snow toward the tree line. They followed, gliding silently over the ice, never breaking stride. My boots sank into snowdrifts, slowing me down. Every time I looked back, they were closer, their heads tilting unnaturally, eyes locked on me. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where the snow was packed and the tree line ended. There was a car parked there, a sheriff's cruiser. I ran to it, pounding on the door. The officer inside looked at me like I was insane. "Get in," he said, unlocking the door. I scrambled in, breathless, frozen. What's happening?" I gasped. He shook his head. "There's been nothing out there. The lake house has been empty for months. Nobody lives there. You're lucky the snowstorm hasn't closed the roads completely." I tried to explain about the figures, the scraping, the faces. He didn't respond, just shook his head and started the car. We drove back toward town in silence. The roads were empty, the snow falling heavier now. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see them on the horizon. Nothing. I never went back to that lake house. The next day, friends called me. worried I hadn't shown up at their homes after the party. They told me the house had been abandoned for years, condemned after a fire had killed several people the previous winter. My friends didn't see anyone else there that night. They said the party never existed. I tried to forget it, but every New Year's Eve since, I wake up to the sound of tapping on windows, scratching on walls, and the faint whisper of Happy New Year in the dark. The thing that followed me that night never stopped. I can feel it at the edge of the darkness, waiting for the year to end, waiting for me to be alone again. Story the end. The night started like any other New Year's Eve in a small town in upstate New York. Snow had fallen lightly during the day, enough to make the streetlights glow like halos over the frost, and the air had that biting edge that made every breath feel sharp. I was driving to my friend Matt's apartment for a small gathering, a few close friends, nothing wild. The roads were quiet, empty except for the occasional car rushing somewhere to beat midnight, and I liked it that way. It gave me time to think, time to relax before the chaos of the night. Matt's place was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, the kind of place where the floors creak and you can hear everything through the thin walls. Inside, the party was lively but not crowded. People drank, laughed, and texted their other friends to meet later. I grabbed a soda, leaned against the wall, and watched. Everything felt normal, cozy even, until about 10:30 when I started noticing something off. It began with the noise outside. At first I thought it was someone setting off fireworks early, which was common in the area. But the bangs weren't random. They were slow, deliberate. Then I heard footsteps, soft, dragging across the roof of the building. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just the old building settling. A few others didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't shake it. I told Matt I was stepping outside for a bit, and he shrugged, saying he'd be out in a minute. The cold hit me immediately when I opened the door. Snow was falling harder now, fat flakes sticking to my coat. I walked down the street, thinking maybe some fresh air would help. That's when I saw it, a man standing under the streetlight at the corner. He was tall, thin, wearing a dark coat and a hood pulled low over his face. His hands were in his pockets, but he didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. I slowed down, instinctively keeping my distance. When I passed the light, I saw his face, pale, almost gray, and his eyes were completely black. My stomach dropped. I tried to brush it off, rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the shadows, or maybe I'd had too much coffee. I kept walking. A few blocks later, I realized he was following me. Every time I glanced back, he was there, staying just out of the light. My heart rate spiked, and I started walking faster. I tried calling Matt, but my phone said, no signal, even though I had checked it inside. Panic began to creep in. I remembered the shortcut through the alley to Matt's building. Normally, it was empty at this hour, but as I turned down it, I noticed something that made me stop cold. Footprints in the snow. They were huge, wider than any man's feet, and they were coming toward me from the other end of the alley. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. That's when I saw him again, the man from the streetlight standing at the far end of the alley, motionless. Behind him, shadows shifted. More figures emerged, blurry at first, then clear. 3 more, all dressed like him, all with the same black eyes. My breath came in short gasps. I backed up, trying to think, trying to plan. Suddenly, a voice called my name. It was Matt, from the street behind me. I whipped around. He was standing there, holding a bottle of champagne, looking confused. Hey, what's wrong? Come on, it's almost midnight. I wanted to run to him, but the figures in the alley didn't move, just watched. And then I realized Matt's eyes weren't black. But there was something in his expression, something stiff and unnatural, that made my stomach turn. Before I could react, the first figure in the alley stepped forward. Its mouth opened, but it didn't speak. Instead, it tilted its head, like it was studying me. The snow around its boots melted slightly, sprack as if the cold itself recoiled. I stumbled backward, tripping over a crate, and hit the wall. My phone slipped from my pocket, skidding across the wet snow. I crawled after it, desperate. When I picked it up, the screen lit up with a single message. Don't look back. I froze. My mind raced. Was this a prank? A crazy person with a phone? But something in the air felt wrong, heavier than snow or cold, like the night itself was pressing down. I looked up briefly, and one of the figures was closer now, walking slowly, deliberately, with a gait that was human and not human at the same time. I ran. Not toward Matt, not toward the street, just ran, blindly, hoping to find the main road. The snow crunched under my boots, and the alley seemed to stretch longer than it should. When I finally burst onto the main street, I didn't see them. I stopped, panting, trying to calm down. But then I heard it again, the footsteps, this time all around me, circling. I spun in a full circle. Nothing. I ran the last block to Matt's building, threw open the door, and slammed it behind me. Inside, the party was still going, but everyone looked up, confused. "Where have you been?" someone asked. I tried to catch my breath. There's something outside," I managed to say. Some people, black eyes." A few laughed. "Dude, you've been outside in the cold too long. It's fine." Matt came up behind me, clapping me on the shoulder. "Seriously, it's almost midnight. You're overthinking." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But when I glanced out the window at the corner where I first saw the man, I froze. The streetlight flickered, and for a split second I saw a figure standing there. Tall, thin, eyes black as ink. Then it was gone. I stayed near the apartment door for the rest of the night, refusing to go near any window. Midnight came, and people cheered, hugged, popped champagne. I forced myself to smile. Everything was fine. It had to be. Around 1 a.m, the party started winding down. Most people had left. I grabbed my coat and went outside to head home, thinking the cold would sober me up and I could laugh this off in the morning. That's when I saw something in the snow. Footprints, large, wide, circling the building, leading nowhere. Not human footprints. And they weren't old. The snow was falling lightly, but these prints cut cleanly through as if made by something alive and heavy, something that had been watching me all night. I got in my car, locked the doors, and didn't breathe until I reached my apartment 10 miles away. The city lights were bright, traffic loud, normal. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw him, standing on the overpass I had just crossed, looking down at me, black eyes shining in the reflection of the streetlights. I never saw him again after that night. I moved across state lines, changed my phone number, avoided New Year's Eve gatherings, but every year at the stroke of midnight, I swear I feel it. The pressure of those eyes, watching, waiting, just beyond the snow and light, reminding me that some nights aren't meant to be celebrated. Some nights are meant to survive. Story the end. The first time I realized New Year's Eve could be dangerous wasn't because of fireworks or drunk drivers like you'd expect. It was because of the kind of darkness that doesn't belong in nature. It was the kind of darkness that hides things, that waits for the world to forget it's there. I was 28 and living in a small town in upstate New York, a place where the wind bites through your coat and the snow settles over everything like a thick gray blanket. I had planned a quiet New Year's Eve with my friends, just drinks, a little music, and watching the countdown on TV. I wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble found me anyway. It started with a text I almost didn't respond to. My old high school friend Jordan messaged me at 7:45 p.m. asking if I wanted to come to a small get-together at a house on the outskirts of town. I hadn't spoken to him in months. The text had a photo of the place, an old Victorian that looked abandoned, its paint peeling and windows dark. "Just a few people," he wrote. "It'll be fun. Bring snacks." I hesitated. My apartment was warm, my plans were simple, and I knew I could easily watch the ball drop on TV like a normal person. But I was restless. Maybe it was the alcohol I'd already consumed at dinner, or maybe it was the memory of wanting adventure when I was younger. I told him I'd come. The road out to his place was narrow and twisted, lined with woods that smelled like frost and rot. By the time I arrived, it was nearly 10 o'clock. The house loomed against the dark sky, bigger and emptier than it had looked in the photo. I parked on the side of the road and noticed the windows were black, except for one dimly glowing in the attic. It looked like an eye watching me, and I shivered. I knocked. No answer. Then the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and dust. The floorboards groaned under my boots. I called Jordan's name, but only my echo replied. I thought maybe he was upstairs or in the back. I wandered through the living room, which was empty, then into the kitchen. The cupboards were bare. The refrigerator hummed, empty except for a half-empty bottle of water. I should have turned around, left immediately, and gone home. But the faint sound of music drew me toward the staircase. At the top, the hallway stretched endlessly, each door shut tight except for one at the very end. Light spilled from it, flickering like candlelight, though there was no candle visible. I stepped closer, my heartbeat quickening, and the smell hit me first. Smoke, damp earth, and something metallic underneath. I pushed the door open. The room was large, larger than any room in a normal house. People were sitting along the walls, talking quietly. At first they seemed familiar, faces from my high school or neighbors I recognized, but the more I looked, the more I realized something was off. Their eyes were hollow. Their movements were slow, unnatural, like they were moving underwater. A man smiled at me, but the smile didn't reach his eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Jordan?" I called, my voice cracking. A woman at the back of the room stood and slowly turned toward me. Her hair was long and tangled, her skin pale as winter snow. My stomach dropped when I realized she looked like a mirror of myself, older but unmistakably me. "You came," she whispered. Her voice was my voice. I froze. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The other figures in the room began to rise, their motions jerky, unnatural. They all turned their faces toward me. The hollow eyes glimmered with something dark and alive. "You have to leave," I said, trying to sound brave, though my voice was trembling. "You can't." My doppelganger said, "It's too late." The room started to shift. The walls elongated, the ceiling stretching higher, twisting like it was alive. The music grew louder, a deep, vibrating hum that made my chest ache. My friends, or the people who looked like my friends, moved toward me, slowly, silently. I ran. I didn't care about the staircase or the doors or the furniture. I ran blindly, crashing into walls, tripping over rugs that weren't there a second ago. I made it to the attic, the one window that glowed dimly from outside. I threw it open and tried to climb out, but the glass didn't break. My hands slipped, my fingers scraped the paint. Then I felt it, cold, wet, crawling up my legs. I looked down. Shadows were moving, tendrils curling around my boots, creeping higher. I screamed and kicked, but the darkness wasn't just shadow. It was alive. It was waiting. I don't remember how I escaped the house. I must have fallen, must have crawled through the snow, because the next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle of the road, the house gone. Nothing was there but the woods, the quiet, and the snow falling softly around me. My boots were wet, my coat torn, my hands bleeding, and my phone was dead. I ran home as fast as I could. By the time I reached my apartment, it was 5 minutes to midnight. I collapsed on my couch, shivering, my teeth chattering. The clock ticked down. 10, 9, 8. I could hear fireworks starting somewhere in the distance. I didn't look outside. I didn't want to see. At exactly midnight, my phone buzzed. One message from Jordan. "Happy New Year. See you next year." I threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall, but then it buzzed again and again and again. Every message was the same. Every message was just one thing, a countdown. 10, 9, 8. I realized then that the house wasn't gone. It wasn't a house at all. It was something else, something that existed outside time, feeding on New Year's Eve. It waited for people who were restless, bored, who wanted something new. It gave them what they wanted, and then it kept them, year after year, trapped in a loop of hollow faces and endless countdowns. I never went back to Ridgeway Road. I never went to parties on New Year's Eve. I don't answer texts from unknown numbers, but every year I hear it. The counting. In the wind, in the hum of my heater, in the faint ringing of my phone. 10, 9, 8. And I know that somewhere, in a place that shouldn't exist, my friends, my doppelgangers, and maybe even Jordan are waiting for the next New Year's Eve, when the darkness comes again and the doors open and the countdown begins anew. The first time I told someone about it, they laughed. They said it was just a bad night, too much alcohol, too much stress. I hope they never see it for themselves. Because when it comes, you don't get to tell yourself it's a joke. You don't get to walk away. The house waits, the shadows wait, and the countdown never stops. I still hear it sometimes, even now. 10, 9, 8. I lock my doors. I stay inside. I pretend the fireworks are just fireworks, the music just music, but deep down I know it's never really over. And every New Year's Eve I check my phone one last time before midnight, hoping there's no message. But there always is. 10, 9, 8, story the end. The night of December 31st had started like every other New Year's Eve for me. Crowded, loud, and full of the kind of reckless energy that comes from knowing You're about to trade 1 year for another without any real consequences. I had just turned 30, and my friends insisted we celebrate in style this time, so we rented a small cabin in the Poconos, far enough from town that the only noise would be our own. Snow covered everything outside, thick and pristine, illuminated under the weak glow of a half moon. It should have been peaceful, beautiful even, but by the time the clock was creeping toward midnight, it felt anything but safe. We arrived at the cabin around 6 p.m., hauling boxes of booze and snacks through the snow. The place was isolated, a 2-story wooden structure with a steep roof, smoke curling from the chimney. It looked perfect for a party. Cozy living room, big fireplace, wooden beams, and a wide front porch that overlooked the frozen woods. My friend Mark immediately claimed the living room with the stereo, someone else took over the kitchen for cooking, and I wandered upstairs to check out the bedrooms. That's when I noticed the guest book. It was old, leather-bound, sitting on the small desk in the corner of the master bedroom. Curious, I flipped it open. The first entry was dated 1973. Most of the notes were benign, families writing about their stay, couples signing in, a few scribbled drawings. But then I noticed a series of entries from the 1980s that all seemed to follow the same pattern. Names, dates, and a short phrase, "Don't stay here at night," or "Something waits after the stroke of 12," written in shaky, almost panicked handwriting. I laughed it off and closed the book, thinking someone was messing with guests for fun. By 8 p.m., the party was in full swing. Music, laughter, and the smell of food filled the cabin. Outside, snow continued to fall lightly. Around 10, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and howling through the trees. We joked about the perfect horror movie setting, but no one actually felt scared, until Mark started telling stories about the previous guests. He had been reading some old news articles he found online about disappearances in the Poconos dating back decades. People who stayed in remote cabins, like ours, often vanished during the night. Nothing had ever been found, no bodies, no clues. We all laughed, assuming the stories were just sensationalized local legends, but I felt a prickle of unease anyway. By 11, we had split into smaller groups, playing drinking games and preparing snacks. I stayed by the fireplace with my girlfriend Lauren when we heard it. At first, it was subtle, a faint tapping sound coming from outside, like someone was lightly drumming on the cabin walls. The wind was loud enough that I thought it was just branches, but the sound was rhythmic, deliberate. I looked out the window toward the woods, but all I could see were dark shapes of trees swaying in the wind. "Probably just a branch," Lauren said. She was laughing nervously, and I tried to join in, but my stomach had that knot of tension you get when your instincts know something is off. The tapping grew louder, shifting to the front porch. We weren't near the door, but it was loud enough to make the hair on my arms stand on end. I called out to Mark and the others, but no one came. They were all still in the living room, absorbed in their own conversations. I went to the door, trying to be casual, trying to convince myself it was the wind. The moment I touched the handle, it slammed inward with a force that nearly knocked me off balance. Lauren screamed. The cabin was silent for a heartbeat. Then the tapping started again, this time from inside the house, upstairs, near the guest bedroom where I had found the old book. We ran upstairs together, hearts hammering. The door to the guest bedroom was closed, the kind with a simple latch. The tapping stopped the moment we reached the hallway. I held my breath, and then I saw it. The door slowly, impossibly, creaked open. Nothing was inside at first glance, just a shadow in the corner. But as our eyes adjusted, we saw a figure crouched low, rocking back and forth. Its face was obscured by hair, and it didn't move when we spoke. It didn't even react. Lauren grabbed my arm, whispering we should leave, but I couldn't move. Something about it felt magnetic, drawing my gaze. The figure straightened abruptly, its face lifted. Hollow eyes, pale skin stretched tight over its skull, and a mouth that opened wider than possible, letting out a sound that wasn't human. More like static, like a radio on the fritz. We ran. Downstairs, we found the living room empty. Everyone was gone. Chairs overturned, glasses shattered, but no one. Only the fire still burned, casting long shadows against the walls. My phone had no signal. We tried shouting, calling names, but only the wind answered. From the kitchen, I heard movement, soft, dragging sounds across the floor. Something, or someone, was inside. We backed toward the front door. Just as we reached it, the handle rattled violently, as if someone was pulling on it from the outside. We bolted through the back door instead, into the snow. But it was a mistake. Behind us, the cabin seemed to groan, the walls stretching like it was alive. I glanced back, and for a moment I swore the shadow in the window was moving independently of the rest of the house. We ran blindly into the woods, the snow muffling our footsteps, but not our screams. Behind us, the tapping started again, this time everywhere, from the trees, from the ground, from above. It followed us. Lauren tripped, and I grabbed her arm just as something brushed past us. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it over the ringing in my ears, but I could feel it, cold, heavy, pressing, watching. We stumbled into a clearing near a frozen pond. For a moment it was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears hurt. Then the tapping started again all around us. The snow beneath our feet seemed to pulse, like the earth itself was alive. Then we heard the whispering. Faint at first, unintelligible, then clear. Our names. Dan. Lauren. We ran again. Every time we looked back, we saw figures moving in the shadows, tall, thin, features distorted, like the face from the guest bedroom, but smaller, multiples. They didn't run, they didn't chase, they just watched, floating closer with each step we took. We ran until dawn. By then, the storm had passed, leaving the woods eerily silent, snow covering our tracks. We emerged onto a service road and saw a car approaching. The driver stopped, stunned to see us, shivering and covered in snow. We told them we got lost in the storm. They didn't ask questions, just drove us to the nearest town. When we returned later with the police, the cabin was gone. Not burned, not abandoned. Gone. The clearing where we had run through the trees was just woods. No trace of the cabin, no tracks from that night except ours leading into the woods and stopping mid-tree line. I've never spent a New Year's Eve in the Poconos again. Every year when December 31st comes around, I feel it. The tapping, faint at first, almost playful, like a reminder that some doors are better left closed. And sometimes, just as the clock strikes 12, I hear my name whispered in a voice that isn't mine. The years have passed, but the memory is as fresh as the snow that night. I've tried to rationalize it, stress, alcohol, sleep deprivation, but deep down, I know what we saw was real. And I know without a doubt that when the clock strikes midnight, some places are not empty. Some doors once opened cannot be closed. Story the end. I used to think New Year's Eve was harmless. Loud, stupid, drunken, sure, but harmless. Fireworks, cheap champagne, kisses that tasted like regret. That belief died on December 31st, 2014, somewhere between 11:58 p.m. and midnight, on a stretch of rural highway outside a town most people would drive through without noticing the sign. I was 27, working construction in western Pennsylvania, living paycheck to paycheck and crashing on couches when I couldn't make rent. My buddy Eric invited me to his cousin's place for New Year's Eve. A farmhouse outside of town, plenty of booze, no neighbors to complain. I didn't know most of the people going, but that wasn't unusual. New Year's parties always blurred strangers together. There were 8 of us who arrived before dark. Snow crusted the fields like dirty frosting. The farmhouse looked abandoned at first, peeling white paint, sagging porch, but inside it was warm, loud, and smelled like beer and burning wood. Someone had hung silver streamers over the doorways. A radio played classic rock until someone hooked up a phone and switched to a playlist full of songs that sounded better drunk. I remember noticing the basement door early on. It was at the end of the hallway near the bathroom, solid wood, no knob, just a recessed metal pull. Someone had duct taped it shut. I joked about it, asked Eric what was down there. Old cellar, he said. Flood sometimes. Don't worry about it. People always say things like that, like worry is a switch you can flip off. By 10 o'clock, everyone was drunk enough that the duct tape became a challenge. Someone, maybe Kyle, maybe Jen, said it was creepy to have a sealed door at a party. Someone else said it was probably hiding bodies. Laughter followed. The tape stayed on, but the mood shifted a little, like a hairline crack in glass. At 10:47 p.m., the power flickered and went out. Phones lit up the room like fireflies. Someone cursed. The music cut off mid-song, leaving a ringing silence that felt too loud. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Eric went to check the breaker. When he came back, he looked confused. "Breaker's fine. Lines must be down." Cell service was spotty even before the storm rolled in. Now, calls wouldn't go through at all. Texts hung unsent. We lit candles. Someone found a flashlight. The party tried to restart itself, but it was forced brittle. Without music, every sound stood out. The pop of the fireplace, the creak of the house settling, the wind moaning through gaps in the siding. At around 11, someone knocked on the front door. That alone wasn't strange. People showed up late to parties all the time. But when Eric opened it, no one was there. Just the porch, dusted with snow, no footprints leading away. The wind blew snowflakes sideways, erasing any sign that someone had stood there at all. Probably kids messing around, Eric said. He didn't sound convinced. We closed the door. A few minutes later, there was another knock. Louder this time. 3 sharp raps. Again, no one. That's when Jen suggested maybe we shouldn't answer anymore. At 11:26, the knocking started on the back door instead. We clustered in the living room, pretending to laugh, pretending this was still fun. Someone tried to make a joke about horror movies. Nobody laughed. At 11:34, the duct tape on the basement door peeled loose with a slow, tearing sound. No one was near it. The metal pull shifted just slightly, like someone testing it from the other side. Kyle swore and grabbed the flashlight. Eric told him not to open it. They argued in low voices. I watched the door, heart hammering, convinced that if I looked away, it would open on its own. The knocking started again. Front door. Back door. Alternating like a pattern. Someone, Sarah, I think, started crying quietly. Kyle yanked the basement door open. The smell hit first. Damp earth, rot, something metallic underneath. The flashlight beam cut down a narrow set of concrete steps into darkness. No standing water, no obvious bodies, just a dirt-floored cellar with stone walls and shelves lined with empty jars. But the walls were scratched. Long, uneven gouges like someone had clawed at the stone until their fingers gave out. Eric shut the door hard and leaned against it, breathing fast. Nobody goes down there, he said. Nobody. At 11:50, we heard footsteps upstairs. That's the part people don't believe when I tell this story. They say maybe someone snuck in, maybe someone was playing a prank. But I know what I heard. Heavy footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving across the ceiling above us. We all stood frozen, staring upward. The footsteps stopped directly over the living room. Then something dropped. Not fell, dropped. A heavy thud shook dust from the ceiling. The sound came from the hallway. We rushed over together. The basement door was open again. Something lay on the floor in front of it. It was a shoe. A woman's shoe, black, scuffed, wet with melting snow. None of us recognized it. From the basement came a sound like breathing. Wet, labored, too close. The knocking stopped. At 11, the radio turned on by itself. Static at first, then a voice cutting through. A man's voice, calm, official, like an emergency broadcast. This is not a test, it said. If you are hearing this, remain where you are. Do not open doors. Do not respond to voices you recognize. The radio clicked off. We didn't have time to react. The front door began to open. Slowly. No knock this time. Just the sound of wood dragging against wood, hinges complaining under careful pressure. Eric ran for it, screaming for whoever it was to get the hell out. He reached the door just as it opened wide enough to see outside. There was no one on the porch. Then something grabbed him. I didn't see what it was. I saw Eric's feet leave the floor, saw his body slam into the doorframe, heard bones crack. He screamed once before he was yanked out into the snow. The door slammed shut. We rushed to the windows, but all we saw were drifting snowflakes and darkness. No tracks. No blood. No Eric. The basement door slammed open behind us. I turned in time to see something pull itself up the stairs. It looked like a man at first glance, tall, hunched, wearing clothes that might once have been normal. But its skin was wrong, gray, stretched tight over sharp angles. Its mouth opened too wide, jaw unhinging as it breathed. It spoke in Eric's voice. "Help me," it said. "Please." Jen ran toward it. I grabbed her arm, but she tore free. She made it 3 steps before it reached her. It didn't bite her. It didn't claw. It wrapped its arms around her like a hug and folded her inward until she disappeared against its chest, like she'd been pressed into mud. The thing turned toward us, face rearranging itself, features sliding until it looked like Jen. "Almost midnight," it said. We ran. I don't remember which door I went through. I remember the cold, the shock of snow through my shoes, the sound of screaming behind me. I remember headlights in the distance, someone driving the highway, oblivious to what was happening in that house. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I hid in a ditch until the sky started to lighten, counting the seconds till dawn because I didn't trust clocks anymore. The police found the farmhouse empty later that morning. No signs of struggle. No bodies. No footprints except mine, leading away from the house. They said maybe everyone left and got lost in the storm. They said maybe I panicked, imagined things. They said a lot of things. The house burned down 2 weeks later, ruled an accident. Every New Year's Eve since, I stay inside. I lock my doors, I turn off the radio at 11:55 because sometimes just before midnight I hear knocking anyway. And sometimes, I swear, it sounds like someone I know. Story the end. The sky over Columbus, Ohio had that particular sharpness to it on New Year's Eve 2016, the kind where the cold cuts through even the thickest coat and the wind whistles in a way that feels like it's carrying voices. I was 27, living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a pizza shop on High Street. My roommates, Mark and Jenna, had been begging me for weeks to come to their New Year's Eve party. I normally avoided big gatherings, but I told myself that this year would be different. It was supposed to be fun, harmless, celebrating the end of one year and the start of another. The party started around 8. Their friends were scattered across the apartment, some on the couch, some in the kitchen pouring drinks. The place was dimly lit, music heavy in the background, people laughing louder than the bass. I kept my coat on for longer than I should have, feeling that gnawing unease that's impossible to explain, but unmistakable when it hits. At 9, Jenna told a story about a friend of hers who'd had a weird experience on New Year's Eve a few years back. She described seeing someone standing outside her window, watching her, and when she turned on the lights, the person had vanished. Everyone laughed, nervously. I laughed too, but there was a tension in the air. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Around 10:15, Mark and a few others went outside to set off fireworks on the balcony. I stayed behind with Jenna, nursing a beer, and that's when I first noticed it. The hallway lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. A soft, dragging sound came from the stairwell below us. It was faint, almost like someone was pulling a heavy box along the concrete steps. I frowned. There shouldn't be anyone there. Probably the building settling, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Jenna didn't respond. She just stared toward the stairwell, her beer frozen halfway to her lips. The sound stopped. Then, a few moments later, there was a knock at the front door. Slow, deliberate. One knock every few seconds. "Who could that be?" Jenna whispered. I went to the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door a crack. Nothing but darkness and the wind carrying a faint sound of distant fireworks. I told Jenna it was probably someone messing around. She didn't look convinced, but the noise outside seemed to calm her, so she went back to her seat. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Around 11:30, the first group came back from the balcony. They were laughing, holding sparklers, faces red from the cold. Someone had brought a little bottle of champagne to pop at midnight. The crowd got louder, excitement building. Everyone was focused on counting down the final minutes of the year. At 11:55, the lights flickered again, this time longer, darker. Not a brief flicker, but a dimming, a gradual sucking of light from the apartment. The music stuttered, the speakers crackling. Everyone noticed. "Power surge?" someone asked. I went to the breaker panel. Everything looked normal. I tested the switches. Nothing tripped. Then I heard it. The dragging sound again, louder, closer. Not from the stairwell, but from inside the apartment, like it was moving under the floorboards. The laughter died. People stopped moving. The music stopped entirely. Silence settled, but it was thick, heavy, unnatural. I felt it in my chest, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. At 11:57, the knocking began again, not at the front door this time, but from the bedroom doors. Slow, methodical. 1, 2, 3 knocks. Pause. 1, 2, 3 knocks. Everyone froze. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and held it in front of me like a weapon. "It's probably someone upstairs," Jenna said, trying to rationalize it. "Maybe the neighbor." I didn't believe her. The knocks stopped, replaced by a scraping sound, like fingernails across wood, deep and uneven, scratching across every door in the apartment at once. The air turned cold, freezing, and our breaths came out in visible clouds. The temperature dropped dramatically in seconds. Then, at exactly 11:59, the front door slammed open. Wind howled through the apartment. Papers, beer bottles, and party decorations scattered. Something, or some things, moved in the doorway. Tall, dark silhouettes. They didn't run, didn't walk, they glided. Limbs bent at impossible angles, movements jerky but deliberate. Screams filled the apartment. People tried to escape through the balcony, but the doors slammed shut on their own. I ran toward the living room to find an exit through the front door, but the silhouettes had blocked the hallway. One of them turned its head toward me. Its face was obscured, nothing human about it, but I felt its eyes on me, cold and calculating. I swung the chair wildly. It passed through the figure as if it were smoke, but the scraping, dragging noise intensified, coming from every direction at once. Jenna grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the kitchen. "Back door!" she yelled. I followed, heart hammering. Outside, the snow had started falling heavily, thick flakes whipping in the wind. But in the snow, I saw more figures emerging from the darkness, coming from the street. Their shapes were wrong. Too tall, too thin, too many limbs moving independently. They weren't running. They weren't human. We made it out the back door and ran across the alley to the convenience store a block over. The automatic lights flickered as we entered. The clerk looked at us, eyes wide, but the store was empty otherwise. We tried calling 911. No signal. Phones were dead. Then the store lights went out. The dragging sound was inside now. We heard it moving through the aisles, stopping near the door we'd come through. Something tapped on the glass from the outside. Slow, deliberate. 1, 2, 3 taps. Then silence. We didn't wait to see it again. We ran into the night, the snow biting our faces, down the street, past abandoned cars, past the shadows that seemed to bend around corners until we reached a gas station with working lights. Other people had gathered there, scared, confused, shaking. Some had seen the same shapes moving outside their homes. The police came eventually, lights flashing. They didn't find anything. No footprints, no forced entries, nothing in the alleys or streets. They chalked it up to mass hysteria, maybe some pranksters or drug-fueled hallucinations. Jenna and I never went back to that apartment. Mark and the others moved away. The news reported nothing substantial, just a blip of odd disturbances in the neighborhood. But I can't forget the dragging, the knocking, the way those things moved. I can't forget the cold that didn't come from the winter air, but from something alive and wrong. Every New Year's Eve since, I feel it in the air just before midnight. That pressure, that sudden drop in temperature. I've never stayed to see it again, and I never will, but I know it's out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the next year to end. It's always the quiet ones who survive, and even then, survival doesn't mean safety. Story, the end.